Saddle up and grab your 6-button control pad and get ready to take on a whole range of pesky varmints in this Wild West themed shooter from Konami. I promise I will keep the Wild West sayings to a minimum in this video. Sunset Riders was a Wild West inspired shooter much in the theme of Contra, but could be played by up to 4 players simultaneously. Each player takes control of one of 4 bounty hunters, and the game's objective is to claim the bounty on each of the bosses in the game. The 4 bounty hunters are Steve, Billy, Bob and Cormano. Steve and Billy wield revolvers, Bob carries a rifle and Cormano uses a double-barrel shotgun. The controls consist of an 8-way joystick for moving and aiming, and 2 buttons for shooting and jumping. The players can jump between higher and lower floors and slide to avoid enemy attacks. Power-ups and bonus items can be obtained by entering doorways, defeating certain sack-carrying bandits, or opening sacks placed on the ground. 2 power-ups are available: a gold sheriff's badge that grants fully automatic fire, and a silver one that gives a player a second gun. Both power-ups can be equipped at once. Other weapons that can be used by the player include dynamite carried by female bandits, hanging items such as rocks or barrels, and torches that can be dropped on enemies, and mounted Gatling guns available only in the last stage. Each level starts off with a wanted poster and bounty for the boss of the stage, and the player racks up the bounties as they play their way through the game, which can be very tough, as it's one-hit kills in this game. 1 life is lost whenever the player is hit by an enemy attack, trampled by bulls, caught in a fire or explosion, or struck by a rock or obstacle. Any power-ups that a player has gained are also lost. Wild West themed games were not very common in this era of video games at all, with most shooters favouring the ones where the player blasts aliens and spacecrafts and the like. So Konami took a risk when producing this game, and I am glad they did, as Sunset Riders is one excellent game to play. The pacing of the game is a lot slower than that of Contra, for example, but is just as equally enjoyable. And the game does feature all the usual Wild West tropes: the cattle stampede, the steam train, the saloon bars, the burlesque dancers, and of course, the metal plate made famous by Clint Eastwood in The Fistful of Dollars, and later on by Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future Part 3. It does, however, also feature some unfortunate stereotypes of the day, such as the Native American boss Chief Scalpum having this quite insulting quote in the game:
"Me ready for powwow."
It was the 1990s, and unfortunately, like today, this kind of stereotyping is rife in all corners of society. The visuals of the game are really good, and the presentation in particular for 1991 was absolutely superb. This semi-animated intro looks gorgeous and almost cartoon-like, and along with the Wild West style theme tune giving it a real sense of a cowboy show style. The in-game visuals are very clear and very colourful too. I have seen a few cowboy movies in my time, but I don't recall ever seeing Clint Eastwood or John Wayne in bright yellow chaps. The detail on the opening level is great, from the saloons to the wooden bridges and the cattle stampede that you run across, and the screen shakes to help create the force generated from the stampede. A very nice little touch to the visual. The enemy cowboys are mostly palette swapped variants, but they all look very good, along with the cowgirls and the Native Americans in the later level. There has been a lot of attention to detail on all of the sprites in the game. The player gets treated to a little bit of light comic relief when standing on a pitchfork or when the enemies get burned, which is the kind of thing I always appreciate in my games. The bosses look great as well, and all look different, and they each perform a classic Wild West death pose and quote. The sound is right up there with the visuals in terms of quality. The Western inspired soundtrack is very suited to the game and sounds pretty authentic, I think. And to say, it does sound like something lifted from a classic Hollywood Western of the 50s and 60s. The sounds of the gunshots don't really sound too much like gunshots, but they're still pretty good. But the explosion sounds are just fantastic in my opinion. There is a fair amount of sampled speech as well, which sounds really clear, but no matter what character you use, they all sound the same. It's not a criticism, just pointing it out, that's all.
We won't shoot him. Alright, ma'am, we won't shoot him. Alright, ma'am, we won't shoot him.
So the visuals are great. The sound is great. Is Sunset Riders all hat and no cattle in the gameplay department? Well, the gameplay is excellent in this game. As I said, it plays at a slower pace than Contra, but it's every bit as enjoyable. And it has that X factor about it. You see, there are only 2 power-ups for the player to collect, so nowhere near as many as Contra, but it's still fun to play. In fact, Sunset Riders is a really fun game to play. It was released by Konami in 1991, and my mate found it in the Lagoon Leisure Centre in Paisley round about summer 1992, and told me it was a really good game, but it was super tough. So of course, I was going to want a go of it. And boy, he was not wrong about the challenge. At 50p a go, it was a bit too much to keep pumping credits in, but it was such a good game to play. The version we played was a 2-player cabinet. I never learned about the 4-player cabinet until 1994, when I seen it in O'Reilly's pool hall in Clydebank. But at that time, no one wanted a 4-player go on it, which was a shame. Anyway, back to the game. Sunset Riders was a game I had many a go on over the years in the arcades when I seen it. I just never managed to beat it. One-hit death games are always a tough nut to crack for me, but I did give it a try. The game got released to the Mega Drive in 1992, and then onto the Super Nintendo about 6 months later. Konami had started a licensing deal with Sega around about this time, which meant, for the first time ever, Sega owners would be able to play Konami games that would have typically been a Nintendo exclusive. Question is though, would any of the ports be able to do the arcade justice?
Please continue.
late 1994, I managed to pick up Sunset Riders for my Super Famicom second hand for about £20. And when I played it, well, I thought it was just fantastic. From the very off, it looks very well done, very close to the arcade, just like the Turtles in Time Port. Konami knocked this one right out the park. They even managed to squeeze in the semi-animated intro from the arcade. The presentation was spot on in my opinion, and the rest of the visuals are again really close to the arcade original. Given this was Nintendo, however, some changes were made to the game. The cowgirls are gone, as are the Native Americans from the later level. Nintendo feeling it was culturally inappropriate, or just Nintendo being Nintendo and censoring the sprites. But it didn't detract from the quality of the game in any way at all. The sprites are a little bit smaller, but this was very common on Super Nintendo ports from arcade games. But they looked every bit as detailed as the arcade original, and you still have the yellow chaps, but the boss at the end of level 1 has no legs when he floats out onto the balcony. Just have a look.
It's time to pay.
Just about all of the other detail from the arcade has made it onto the 8MB cartridge. All of these great visuals squeezed onto a tiny 8MB cartridge. That's very impressive indeed. The sound is also very accurate to the arcade. Of course it is. The Super NES had one of the best sound chips of the 16-bit era, and the quality from it was always good, in the right hands. And Konami had a safe pair of hands when it comes to porting their arcade games. The sampled speech is a little on the muted side, I would say, and the boss from level 1, Simon Greedwell, goes from sounding like Michael Gambon and then to Christopher Walken when he gets beat. Just listen and pick up the trademark pause.
It's time to pay. Marry me with my money.
The gameplay is every bit as tough as the arcade, and in fact, the Super NES version seems a lot harder. When you get killed and you reappear, you're only immune for about half a second, and so you do get caught up in a lot of cheap deaths in the game. But the options menu does allow for you to change up the difficulty, to make it easier or harder, if that's your thing. And if you want to see the true ending, you will need to change up the difficulty. Typical Konami, the game requires 2 playthroughs, and on the top difficulty to see the true ending, which again, in Konami fashion, is not really worth the effort at all. Overall, Sunset Riders on the Super Famicom is a great conversion of a great game, and I remember being as pleased as punch when I picked it up for £20 and played it for a few days. By the time I got this game, I could afford to get a new game every week, and so by the following weekend I was usually playing something else. But I did return to this very often over the years, and I was only ever able to beat it on the easy and normal settings, and not on the double playthrough either. I never played the Mega Drive version, but I did see it a few times, and yes, the Mega Drive version is also very good, but my preference was always to the Super Famicom version. It was more authentic to the arcade and closer to. And when it came to rating arcade ports, I always used the arcade as a measuring stick. In closing, Sunset Riders is still a great game, and I think it has stood up really well, even today. If you want a quick blast on something that is not as frenetic as Contra, then give it a go, if you have the ability to do so. I think it's on the Nintendo Virtual Console, and countless compilation packs, and also MAME and other good emulators. And that was my look back at Sunset Riders. If you like this video, then please do give me a sub and a thumbs up, or maybe even a comment or two below about your memories of Sunset Riders. And a big thank you to all who have subscribed and posted comments. It really does mean a lot, and I do appreciate all of the feedback, so thank you. And that's all from me, folks. Thanks for watching.
I say, bit of bad luck.